the studio. We're going to get right to it today. We're working on block number 5 of our Winter Wonderland tree skirt. You can see we have it here on the table. This particular block is kind of a little bit simpler than our previous one with the Santa Claus. We just have our little bird mascot on there, a tree, and a little bit of a flourish. And I also don't think there's any overlap on this one. So we can go ahead and get this one started, and I'll get the table cleaned up and set up for that, and we'll get right to it. I'm going to get started on my block for the month. And one of the first things I always like to do, especially when I have a really big pattern like this, is just go ahead and press out any creases that might have developed while it was in the packaging. And I'm just using a dry iron here. I don't want any of these big creases to translate into misplacing some of my fabric pieces when I'm doing my applique. So I have that done. I can set that aside. And now I'm just going to take a look at any of my pieces of applique that have been pre-cut and pre-fused. And this particular one had a little bit of a crease in it when it was in the package. It wasn't folded, it was just had a little crease. So I'm going to go ahead and iron that out so it has time to cool. And then, oh, my iron tried to trip me and kill me. I'm going to take my block and just give it a fresh press. I want to be pretty gentle with this because this wedge is bias cut. Almost every single edge of this was cut on the bias to give us this wedge and curved edge. So I just want to go ahead and be very careful about how I press it, but I want to get any wrinkles out of that as well. I think my shirt matches my background almost. Does this shirt make me look fat? Don't answer that. So now that I have my back pressed, I can go ahead and get my light box set up, and I'll pull you in a little bit closer so you can see what it is that I'm doing, and then we can get some applique on that. As with a lot of the pieces on the applique or any applique, you have layer after layer after layer. That's what applique means, to apply one component on top of another. And we can see that there are some pieces, like this part of the house has the door and the beautiful window above the door. So I can go ahead and put those pieces on my front of my house without waiting for get to the background. That way I can see really well where those pieces go without that background layer interfering with my view. Now we have the same issue here. I can put my windows in place. In the case of the chimney exceeds the roof line of the roof, so I can go ahead and leave that piece until I get it on the background to make sure I have it right. Everything else also exceeds, except for that one little flourish here. I could put that one in place. And the reason for doing this is just so we can see a little bit better without having to see through all the layers. Now the house components themselves still have the paper backing on it, so I can shift those aside. Now I can go ahead and put my background fabric on here and get those pieces in place without the extra layer bothering my view of the pattern. Now I have my placement guide at the bottom, and I have my wedge, my background fabric, all in place. I also can utilize the color guide for placing the items in place that I have to put down. I can go ahead and put this component on here, and I call these compound units because it's got multiple layers of pieces on there. And now I have that in place, and I've got the windows all set to go. Because these are repositionable, I can go ahead and pick up and move pieces if I need to. They are repositionable until we fuse it. And here, what I really want to pay attention to is the actual edge where these are touching. So if the pattern is shifted or anything, I want to pay attention to the actual fabric, not to the pattern, if there is any variance. You can see how quickly this month is going to go. If you have family members that would like to help with this process, there are all different kinds of ways that they could help. If you have really young ones, they could use the applique shapes as puzzle pieces, and you could let them match up the pieces on the paper pattern, and that would be like a little puzzle. If they're a little more adept with their fingers, they could help peel the paper backing off and maybe even help with the placement after they've peeled the paper down. The reason we would want to do that is to incorporate some memories with the kids, so they have a memory of this with their parents, their grandparents, their aunts and uncles, and the project would actually have more meaning to them. Let's see, is there another leaf somewhere? I think that is my bird's feather. I get talking and I almost put my leaf in the wrong place. I really like the background that I chose. I was in love with this color as soon as I saw it at the store. Little thing about value here. Value does all the work, but color gets all the credit. I'm sure you've heard me say that before. But when we have things that overlap, generally there's a darker and a lighter one. The darker one should go to the back. That is the way things would be in nature, and it gives something the illusion of dimension. So you can see I put my darker berry behind the lighter one. And I'm giving my little mascot some legs to walk around on. And this little beak is always one that I have to be very careful with. It's such a small piece. Again, here we have 3 pieces, and I'm going to do them with the darkest to the back. And some of these might even be a little bit of an interpretation, especially because they're batik. about which one is the darkest and which one is the lightest. I have a berry over here. I have a doorknob. Put my green feather in the right place. And we're getting down to the last little nibbits here. Even our little mascot has his Santa hat on. The fact that these are all laser cut and pre-fused certainly takes a lot of the aggravation out of making this project. And if you have younger ones that have a hard time maintaining their attention span, this is just about as long as you could expect to get them to pay attention to something. And there you have it. This is all of our components for this month's block. I'm going to go ahead and get the light box and the paper out of the way, and we can fuse this in place and set it aside for next month. Now next month we'll be working on our last block, block number 6, but we'll also be piecing together all of the wedges and then putting on any of the applique that overlapped a seam line. And I have all of those put aside. There aren't a lot of pieces, but there are some, so next month's video will be a little bit longer. And then the video after that will be quilting this, and that should be really interesting because it's an unusual shape. I'm going to be quilting it on the long arm, and I'll be using a digital pattern from Urban Elements. Before I get to fusing, I always like to look over the pattern to make sure that nothing is shifted. We do a good job moving things with this because of the Steam-A-Seam 2, which allows you to reposition but also keeps it tacky and in place while you're working. The ultra suede pieces on the eyes and the doorknobs are a little bit thicker, and those are very likely to shift because of their weight more than anything else. Now it's time to fuse, and I always like to use water from a mister because the Steam-A-Seam 2 does require a steam component to activate the fusible webbing. That's where it gets its name, Steam-A-Seam 2. I don't put water in my iron because I don't want my iron to leak. It makes my iron last longer. So I just use a little spray bottle, a mister, and I also always utilize a Teflon pressing sheet. And this is a really nice large one. I got this from Laura Heine's website because she does a lot of the laser cut or the pre-fused applique also. I'm not sure, I don't think her kits are laser cut. I believe you do all the cutting yourself, but she does utilize Steam-A-Seam 2. These applique are all available on our website, urbanalements.com. And what I like to do is just let that heat from the iron transfer through the Teflon pressing sheet and then down through the compound layers of the applique. Now some of these pieces, like the house, have the doors on it, so you have the layer of the door, the house, and then the background, and so you really need to give that iron time to transfer the heat all the way through to activate the Steam-A-Seam. The Teflon pressing sheet protects my fabric from getting scorched. It protects the edges of the applique from getting shifted if I'm lazy and don't pick up my iron. But it also protects the iron itself from getting any Steam-A-Seam 2 onto the iron. After I iron the entire surface of this, what I'll do is flip this block over and iron it again from the back, just to make sure that we've had time to give that heat all the way through the layers. I have the entire front of the wedge fused in place. I used both the steam and the heat of the iron. I went ahead and sprayed the entire back again and got all of the components nice and moist. And then I went ahead and ironed all of this until it was completely dry. So now I have this block completely fused in place. If you fuse properly from the beginning, all of these components are permanent. We have tested this by washing a sample over 20 times and throwing it into the dryer just as you would normal clothes. You may get a little bit of a soft edge around the applique, but you would get that even if you top stitched, because all of the needle perforations on these edges would give you a soft edge as well. So what we will do is quilt this, and that will become permanent. Well, it's permanent now. Even if I use this on a garment like an apron or a jacket, this is permanent without any stitching on it. So this block is finished for this month. We'll go ahead and put this aside. Next month is the big month when we get all of the, we'll get the last wedge finished, and we'll get all the wedges put together, and it will actually start looking like a tree skirt. As well, we will get the overlapping components of the applique in place. So this is coming together really nicely. I want to thank you for joining us for this process, and I look forward to seeing you next time.